Some killers were caught. Some were punished. Some were forgotten. These were not. They left behind names without answers, graves without closure, families without certainty. No fingerprints that lasted, no confessions that held, only stories that never found an ending. This isn't about justice. It's about the cases that escaped it. 6 killers, 6 mysteries the world still hasn't solved, and one question that refuses to disappear. What if they're still out there? We begin in New York, on a quiet stretch of beach where the tide erases more than footprints. In December 2010, police searching the marshes near Gilgo Beach on Long Island were looking for a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert. Instead, they found a body, and then another. Within days, investigators uncovered the remains of 4 women along Ocean Parkway, just feet from the roadside dunes. All were wrapped in burlap. All had vanished years earlier after advertising escort services online. As the search area widened, the number kept climbing. By 2011, 10 sets of remains were found along Long Island's South Shore, including a man and a toddler. Some victims were quickly identified. Others became known only by placeholders: Jane Doe, Fire Island Jane, Peaches. Investigators believe most victims were strangled, but decomposition erased nearly all forensic evidence. Timelines blurred. Causes of death were difficult to confirm. For more than a decade, the case went nowhere. Jurisdictional confusion fractured the investigation. Leadership changed. Evidence stagnated. Then, in 2023, the case broke open. A newly formed task force re-examined old phone data, financial records, and witness statements. One detail reappeared again and again: a specific vehicle seen near multiple victims. That trail led investigators to Rex Uriman, an architect living less than 20 miles from the burial site. Authorities say phone records, burner phones, and DNA recovered from discarded items link him to several victims. He was arrested in July 2023 and charged with 3 murders, with a 4th linked case under investigation. Uriman has pleaded not guilty and remains in custody awaiting trial. An arrest was finally made. But an arrest is not the same as an ending. Not all victims have names. Not all deaths have answers. And investigators have never confirmed whether one man is responsible for every body buried along Ocean Parkway. Gilgo Beach is quiet now. Families walk the shore. Joggers pass the seagrass. But beneath the sand, the truth still isn't settled. A suspect may be in custody, but the truth may never be. From the shoreline of New York to the high desert of New Mexico, what was hidden by water in one state was swallowed by dirt in another. In February 2009, a woman walking her dog along the western edge of Albuquerque noticed something strange poking through the dirt. It wasn't a rock. It was a human bone. Police sealed off the area immediately. What followed was one of the most disturbing forensic excavations in New Mexico history. Over several weeks, investigators uncovered the remains of 11 women scattered across a remote stretch of desert known as West Mesa. Each victim had vanished years earlier, most between 2003 and 2005. Many of the women lived on the margins of society. Some struggled with addiction. Some were homeless. Several were known to engage in sex work. A few were never reported missing at all. The location offered a few clues, but the graves told a story. The women had been placed in shallow depressions, spaced deliberately. They weren't dumped in panic. They were buried with purpose. Investigators believe the murders likely occurred within a short period of time and then stopped abruptly. Whether the killer was arrested for another crime, moved away, or simply died is unknown. Over the years, detectives chased dozens of leads. A local pimp vanished overseas. A known sex offender lived nearby. Another suspect fit nearly every psychological profile. None could be tied to the crime scene. Weather and time erased forensic evidence. No usable DNA. No identifiable tools. No witnesses. The unknown offender became known only as the West Mesa Bone Collector, a name not given by the killer, but by the land that kept his secret. Today, a small memorial stands where the women were found, 11 names carved into stone, open desert beyond it. No fences, no walls, just the sense that something terrible once lived here. Because somewhere near Albuquerque, someone buried 11 women in the sand and was never seen again. The desert kept its dead in silence. Washington, D.C. would hear them speak. Between 1971 and 1972, a predator moved through Washington, D.C. Not in the dark, in daylight. Young girls disappeared from sidewalks, bus stops, and school routes, taken from places their families believed were safe. 6 victims were eventually confirmed. All were black. All were between 10 and 18 years old. All were abducted within a few miles of home. They vanished quietly, and then their bodies began to appear. Some were found in wooded areas, others near abandoned buildings. Some were located close to major highways that cut through the city. But what separated this case from nearly every other was the voice. After several of the murders, the killer began calling the victims' families and the police. In one call, he criticized officers for failing to protect the girls. In another, he hinted at the location of a body, just enough to prove he knew, but not enough to stop what would come next. Newspapers gave him a name, the Freeway Phantom, because his victims were recovered near major roads, and because no one saw him coming. Washington was unprepared. The city was already overwhelmed by rising crime in the early 1970s. Resources were stretched thin. Communities didn't trust police. Police didn't always trust informants. Tips flooded in, hundreds of them. Suspicious neighbors, rumored acquaintances, false confessions. None led anywhere. The most chilling detail came after the final murder. The victim had been abducted from her own home while babysitting. Her parents returned hours later to find a note left behind. The handwriting looked childish, the spelling uneven. The message was short, but its meaning was unmistakable. The killer had been inside their home, and he had waited. Despite task forces, behavioral analysis, and renewed DNA testing years later, no one has ever been charged. Some investigators believe the Phantom may have been someone familiar with the neighborhoods, someone who knew routines, or someone who blended in perfectly. Others believe he left Washington entirely, or that he died, or that he simply stopped. But the truth never followed. In 1 year, a city learned how quickly safety disappears, and 50 years later, the man who took it was never seen again. In Washington, one voice haunted the city. In northern British Columbia, the silence stretched for hundreds of miles. Along a remote highway in northern British Columbia, a pattern has been unfolding for more than half a century. Not of accidents, of disappearance. Highway 16, a stretch of road running through forests, mountains, and isolated towns, became known as the Highway of Tears after women and girls began vanishing along its course. Since the late 1960s, dozens of cases have been tied to this corridor and the secondary roads around it. Some were hitchhiking. Some were walking to school or heading home from work. Some were driving and simply never arrived. Most were indigenous. For years, their disappearances were treated as unrelated. A missing teen in one town, a body found miles away in another. Families filed reports, posters went up, then came silence. Unlike a typical serial killer case, there was no single crime scene, no moment of realization, no obvious connection. The disappearances unfolded slowly, across decades, spread so thin that no single investigator could see the whole picture. By the time authorities publicly acknowledged a pattern, the damage was already done. In 2005, the RCMP launched Project Deep Hannah to investigate a cluster of cases along Highway 16 and nearby routes. What they found was unsettling. Not one predator, but many. Different years, different methods, different kinds of violence. At various times, investigators also explored whether some disappearances may have involved transient workers or long-haul drivers, individuals who moved through these communities unnoticed, crossing jurisdictions, rarely remembered. That theory never produced a charge, and so the road itself remains the constant. What made the Highway of Tears uniquely dangerous wasn't just opportunity, it was neglect. Entire communities felt ignored, tips were lost, files stagnated. With no public transit between towns, hitchhiking wasn't risky, it was unavoidable. Isolation created vulnerability. Distance erased urgency. And for families, waiting became a way of life. What remains today aren't statistics. They're bedrooms left untouched, school pictures that never age, and parents who keep porch lights on for children who never came home. Because the most haunting detail of all is not who did this, it's how long it was allowed to continue. Somewhere between Prince George and Prince Rupert, this road still carries its past, not in sound, but in absence. On the Highway of Tears, the silence swallowed everything. In California, the killer made sure the world never stopped listening. In the late 1960s, a killer didn't just strike Northern California, he performed. The man who called himself the Zodiac sent letters to newspapers, mocking police, taunting the public, and daring authorities to stop him. His crimes were brutal, but his obsession with attention was worse. He mailed cryptic messages written in symbols and codes, puzzles for investigators and civilians alike. Some were cracked in days, others remained unsolved for years. One cipher went unsolved for over half a century. Even when parts of his message were decoded, they revealed no identity, only ego. The Zodiac didn't want fear, he wanted to be remembered. He claimed dozens of victims, only a handful were ever confirmed. And with each letter, his appetite for recognition grew. He wore disguises and brought theater into his crimes, appearing masked to victims and leaving behind symbols instead of answers. Suspects came and went. Police chased names until the paper wore thin, and then chased more. No arrest, no confession, no grave. The letters eventually stopped, not because the Zodiac was found, but because he chose silence. Whether he died, changed names, or simply outgrew his need for attention will never be known. Because the Zodiac's greatest weapon wasn't the way he killed, it was fear. And fear did what he wanted it to do. It made him impossible to forget. The Zodiac wanted to be remembered. The next killer became history. In 1988, London met a killer who would never leave it. The streets of Whitechapel were poor, crowded, and dark. Perfect for a predator who moved unseen. 5 women were murdered within months, each killing more violent than the last. The newspapers gave him a name, Jack the Ripper. He sent letters to the press, some real, some fake, bragging, threatening, promising more blood. The city panicked. Police patrols doubled. Locks were bolted. People slept light. The wounds suggested knowledge of anatomy. The precision fueled theories. A butcher, a doctor, a sailor. Suspects poured in for over a century. A royal conspiracy, a mad immigrant, a respected professional. Each theory convinced someone, none convinced history. No arrest was ever made, no identity confirmed, no grave to stand over. The Ripper didn't vanish because he was caught. He vanished because the fog swallowed him, and the world filled the silence with legend. Jack the Ripper became more than a killer. He became the moment evil learned how to live forever, without a face. Some stories don't end with answers, they end with silence. And somewhere, in that silence, the truth still exists, waiting. We've told the stories of the killers who escaped forever. Next time, we look at what they chose when there was nothing left to choose.